It's good to see you today. It is August 15th. Our reading today comes from Ezekiel. Hope you have enjoyed the last few days. But again, check our description for the reading. A couple chapters in Jeremiah. I want to look in Ezekiel today. I believe our reading is Ezekiel 1 through 3. I want to just start reading in verse 4. He said to me, the Lord said to me, and he sees the glory of the Lord in chapter 1, verse 4 of this chapter. Son of man, go to the house of Israel and speak with my words to them, for you are not sent to a people of unfamiliar speech and hard language, but to the house of Israel. Not to many people of unfamiliar speech and of hard language, whose words you cannot understand. Surely had I sent you to them, they would have listened to you. But the house of Israel will not listen to you, because they will not listen to me. For all the house of Israel are impudent and hard-hearted. Behold, I have made your face strong against their faces, and your forehead strong against their foreheads, like adamant stone, harder than flint. I have made your forehead. Do not be afraid of them, nor be dismayed at their looks, though they are a rebellious house. Moreover, he said to me, Son of man, receive into your heart all my words that I speak to you, and hear with your ears, and get to the captives, to the children of your people, and speak to them, and tell them, Thus says the Lord God, whether they hear or whether they refuse. And then the Spirit lifted me up, and I heard behind me a great thunderous voice, Blessed is the glory of the Lord from his place. I also heard the noise of the wings of the living creatures that touched one another, and the noise of the wheels beside them, and a great thunderous noise. And so the Spirit lifted me up and took me away, and I went in bitterness, and the heat of my spirit, but the hand of the Lord was strong upon me. Then I came to the captives at Tel Abib, who dwelt by the river Chabar, and I sat where they sat, and remained there astonished among them 7 days. So this is the verse where, and it's just an interesting verse, as the Lord is speaking to him, and he says, I have made your face strong against their faces, and your forehead strong against their foreheads. And that what he's saying is, you are going to have, I am making you hard-headed. That's the figure that he's using. Sometimes we look at hard-headedness, and we look at it as a bad thing, and sometimes it is a bad thing. But not always. And while we should be willing to yield, we should not be willing to yield to sin. And when you're dealing with rebellion and with sin, you better be hard-headed. And so the Lord, speaking to Ezekiel, says, I am making your head harder than their head. Harder than their head. They're hard-headed, I'm going to make you more so. So, the question is why? Why is it sometimes the case that we have to be stubborn? Why is it sometimes the case that we do have to be hard-headed? Well, one reason, to look back at our passage, he says, and I understand, he says, the house of Israel will not listen to you, verse 7. But that doesn't mean they cannot listen. And sometimes phrases are used like that, where, and we'll just make this point, you know, when he says, whether they hear or whether they refuse, verse 11, we may make the point, their reaction is up to them, whether they hear or whether they refuse. That's on them. But at the same time, we can say, does all the house of Israel will not listen to you? Does all the house of Israel, they're all impudent and hard-hearted? You know, he does tell them, he does tell him, go to your people. Well, he is also of the house of Israel. So my point is real simple. Yes, most of them would not listen. But is it 100%? Or is there a chance that maybe someone will listen? It's up to them whether they do or not. Maybe nobody does. But maybe someone will listen to the truth. And so he says, consume my word and tell it to them. Tell them the truth. Yes, I'm making your head harder than theirs. You're going to have to be stubborn about this. You're going to have to be hard-headed about this. Because the only thing that's going to get through their thick skull is if I make your skull thicker. And yeah, they may still not listen, but maybe somebody will. It'll be up to them. It'll be up to them. But that's how it is with us very often too. If when we're dealing with sin and rebellion and wickedness, sometimes we have to be hard-headed. We have to be stubborn. We have to be steadfast. And people will accuse us and they'll say, "Oh, you're just being stubborn for the sake of being stubborn." No, we want to do what's right. And if this is what God has said, then it is what God has said. So, we speak the truth. And sometimes we have to be like Ezekiel, and because we have to be sometimes we have to be hard-headed. Because we have to try to get through to people. So, and you hope that someone will listen. Regardless of whether they listen or not, though, you might back up to chapter 2. In chapter 2 at verse 5 it says, "As for them, whether they hear or whether they refuse, for they," pardon me, tickling my throat, "for they are a rebellious house, yet they will know that a prophet has been among them." So whether they listen or not, at least they'll know, at least they will have heard the truth. And they will know that when it all comes out, they are not going to be able to say at Judgment Day, "Well, nobody told us." That's why we have to be stubborn. That's why we have to be steadfast in the truth. So that people can't say, "Well, you never mentioned him to me." Sometimes we always have to be steadfast. It just sounds odd to describe it like the Lord is talking about it here. I'm making your head harder than theirs. But that's how we have to be sometimes. We have to be more steadfast in the Lord than the world is steadfast with the devil. We have to be more loyal to the Lord than the world is loyal to whichever God they're serving. We have to be more steadfast. Come back to our passage now. And frankly, when it comes down to it, we have to be hard-headed because they're hard-headed. And that's just how it is. Because they are hard-headed. Why do we have to be so stubborn? And the point that we can make is, sometimes people have the idea that the James passage, be willing to yield. If you are willing to yield for every hard-headed person that comes down the pipe, that's not good. That is not what that passage is talking about. We are willing to yield in matters of liberty. We better be willing to yield in those areas. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, and then all those other characteristics. But it's first pure. And so we are steadfast with that. And so one reason that we have to be stubborn sometimes is because people can be stubborn in sin and rebellion. And that's what Ezekiel's dealing with, and that's what the Lord is dealing with. And he says specifically in talking to Ezekiel, he says, "Listen, This is sort of like with Samuel. They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me." Verse 7, "The house of Israel will not listen to you because they will not listen to me. They are impudent, they are hard-hearted. And so I'm going to make your face strong against their face. I'm going to make you hard-headed." And he goes off, and you can tell, by the way, those latter verses, "I went in bitterness in the heat of my spirit, but the hand of the Lord was strong upon me." That's a hard thing. That's a hard thing that the Lord wants him to do. And you can tell Ezekiel, there in verse 14, you can tell there's some issues there. But the Lord was strong upon him. The hand of the Lord was strong upon him, and so he would go. Hard-headed. Appreciate you. Hope everything is going well. Thank you for studying along with us, however brief it may be, and we hope you join us for our next brief look into God's Word.